topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working in Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Great to have you back again. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we have not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture and inspirational leadership activated by meaning and purpose. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com and my personal site, elisecortez.com. Before we get into today's program, I'm thrilled to announce that registration is now open for a fabulous new conference for women for which I'll serve as the MC. It's called Thrive in 25 and is a jam-packed few days in Chicago, June 25th through the 28th, 2025. And it's designed to help develop women as whole selves, from bolstering your mindset to your financial acumen to your leadership to incorporating nature and art into your life to raise consciousness and much more. Visit thrive-in25, the number 25. .com for more information and to register. You can use my promo code GUSTO, all caps, to gain access to the free books and programs I'll be also gifting to registrants. See you there. Now, getting into today's program, we have with us today Dr. Andrew Kadar, a physician at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, a diplomate of the American Board of Anesthesiology, and a fellow of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. He's the author of Getting Better, a doctor's story of resilience, recovery, and renewal. We'll be talking about his own story of moving from doctor to patient, his own patient experience of being treated and healing, and some of his ideas for improving healthcare delivery and navigating healing for patients. Dr. Kadar, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
It's really great to have you and to get to celebrate this amazing thing you brought into the world. This is a beautiful book. And you're welcome. As I told you before we got on air together, it felt like I was sitting right next to you, alongside you in your hospital room at your bedside, there next to your wife, Rachel. It was really an amazing experience to get to read this book. So thank you for bringing it into the world for us. Especially, I really feel like you're doing such a beautiful service from both the vantage point of being a doctor as well as what it is to be a patient.
Yes, while I was going through this experience, I realized that I was learning quite a bit from it and that I could explain it from both the point of view of a doctor and a patient. And I thought that that would be helpful for other people as well. And that's why I wrote this book.
Well, that's fantastic. I definitely want to hear a bit about the story because people haven't read the book like I have. But let's first start with the notion that you are a doctor, Dr. Kadar. Why not an archaeologist? Why aren't you in marketing? Why did you pursue medicine?
When I was in high school and college, I envied my colleagues who knew what they wanted to do from an early age. I did not. I searched around quite a bit. My undergraduate major was physics. But when I was in the lab in my junior year, I realized that I wasn't happy being all alone by myself in the lab, and I wanted more interaction with people. So I started looking around for other things that I could use my scientific background, but would be more people-oriented. And that's how I eventually drifted over to first thinking about biophysics and biomedical engineering, and then finally going into medicine.
It's quite a niche that you're an anesthesiologist. When I had my daughter 21 years ago, I'm sure you probably had similar experiences with your patients, but of course I promptly proposed to him once he gave me the medicine. He laughed and said, I get that a lot.
Well, I think our job is twofold. One is to make people comfortable, and when people have a procedure or an anesthetic for an operation, naturally you're anxious, and our job is to calm people down, to make them more comfortable, and some of that is how you interact with people, and some of it, of course, we get a lot of good help from pharmacology as well.
For sure. Okay, so now we really have to open the show by letting our listeners and viewers understand a bit of just what you went through. So we don't want to go into all the detail because we wouldn't be able to get through the other questions I had planned for you, but let's help them understand what happened to you. How did you recognize that you needed some treatment? What was going on? And then kind of walk us through the early stages of everything you went through.
It started out typically how coronary artery disease usually presents. I was working out in the gym, and all of a sudden I felt some burning in the center of my chest. And of course, I thought about heart disease. I mean, everybody knows that the most common presentation of heart disease is pain in the chest. But I know I didn't have heart disease because I had none of the usual risk factors. I did not have high blood pressure, was not overweight, never smoked, I worked out regularly, and I had a great family history. My father lived to be 94. He was still hiking with me in the Rockies when he was 86. So I knew I didn't have heart disease. And so that time I just decided, okay, I'm not feeling well. I'll knock off today. And now I knew that the most common presentation of heart disease, of coronary artery disease, is chest pain that comes on with exercise and goes away promptly with rest. So those three things, the location and coming on with exercise and going away with rest. I also knew about denial, which is a tendency for people to ignore symptoms of diseases that they don't want to have. So it's very common with cancer. It's very common with heart disease because people dread those illnesses. And unfortunately, I did exactly what a lot of other people do, is just went into denial and I thought, okay, I don't have heart disease. I'll just ignore this. But 3 days later, I was back in the gym. Then again, 9 minutes into a fairly intensive workout, I had the burning again. This time I stopped and I thought, okay, I'm going to see what's going on. It went away. And I started pedaling on the elliptical again. And now in about 2 minutes, I had the burning. Now, at that point, I got off the exercise equipment, sat down and thought to myself, okay, I don't have heart disease, but what would I tell anybody else who had these symptoms? And then the answer became obvious. And I think that the first lesson to me was how to get away from denial. And the best way I know of is take it away from yourself, because we're all too close to our own selves. I was quite sure I didn't have heart disease, but these symptoms dictated what needed to be done. And once I took it away from myself, I was able to make an appointment with my doctor and eventually get the treatment I needed.
And it wasn't very much time, right? Once you determined that you need to get this checked out, we're talking about a day or two, right?
It was about 4 or 5 days before I had the stress test. But once I had the stress test, it showed obvious signs of coronary artery disease. The next day I had the angiograms, and I thought that there would probably be at most one vessel that they could dilate and I could go back to work the following day. But instead, it turned out to be a triple vessel disease. So 3 vessels were involved, including a fairly large occlusion in the largest coronary artery, which is that occlusion is popularly known as the widowmaker for the reasons you'd expect it to be called that. And so yeah, I needed to have surgery the next day.
And we'll talk more about that as we go through here, but I just wanted to situate for our listeners and viewers just what we were talking about. It's really quite dramatic what you went through. Mm-hmm. So then kind of a little bit fast forward then, and I know this book has come out many years since you went through all that, but was there some part of your journey that made you think, I do want to write a book about this? I want to capture this.
Yeah, as I was going through it, really from an early part, I was thinking, this is I'm learning from this experience, and I can explain it from both the point of view of a patient and a doctor. And I thought that this would be helpful for other people, both for patients and their family members, because the person that's most closely affected are your loved ones besides yourself, and when you have a major illness.
Mm-hmm. Pretty interesting point of view for sure, which makes me then I can't help but ask you this question, and that is, you are a doctor who became a patient. How's your view on medicine and how its practice been informed or altered because of that experience?
It's more an issue of experiencing what I already knew about, but it's quite different. It's like, think about reading about a car crash or talking to somebody who's been in a car crash and being in a car crash yourself. So I treated people who in car crashes, but this time I was in the crash myself.
Yeah.
And that was a very different experience. There's a lot more vulnerability involved. There are a lot more doubts involved, and it affects you more viscerally, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and then there I want to go to the other thing that's really interesting to me, a person who really I care about. I'm a systems-oriented person, Dr. Kadar. That's what my PhD is in human development. We did a lot of systems kind of work, and I really think about the whole system. And one of the things that I find compelling about what you write about and what you share in your book is you talk about the notion of physical recovery that's beyond the physical. There's emotional, there's spiritual, there's relational. So why was it important for you to address all those different dimensions?
Because I felt all these things really for the first time. I think as a physician, you're somewhat removed from the vulnerability that patients feel. I mean, I was aware of that, of course, but I had never felt as vulnerable. I never felt I think as a young person, you feel immortal, and that feeling didn't go away for me until this happened. I think having this experience where you're really facing the possibility of perhaps not making it through, or at least being aware that this could be a deadly situation, puts your life in a different perspective. And I think that there are other people who can perhaps get to that without having this kind of experience, but this is the experience that brought it home for me.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to articulate, having gone through something like this, I would imagine that it does change people in many, many ways. Are you able, and if that's true for you, are you able to articulate who was Dr. Kadar before and who is he after this experience?
I think what it did is it made me think a lot more about my impact on other people and what I want to and how I want to affect other people. Now, it's not that didn't consider myself a kind and caring person before, but I pay a lot more attention to how I affect other people. So in practical terms, I think more about complimenting the people I work with and showing appreciation for the things that they do for me and things that they do for others. So I think it made me, perhaps in some ways, a more empathetic person, because this experience brought home the fact that life is finite, and I want to leave a positive influence on others in my life.
Okay, not to at all diminish what you just said there, but now you've given me a remarkable idea, Dr. Kadar, because the results of what happened for you was exactly what I do within my company, which is a human and organizational transformation organization. And we do teach that being able to communicate how people matter and what their contribution is, because that speaks to meaning. So now what I realize is all I have to do my work really well is to ensure that everyone has a heart attack. That's it.
Now, Now, I want to reiterate one thing. I did not have a heart attack.
Right. I got that. I know. But to produce a similar kind of an outcome, I'm thinking that's what I need to head for. Just kidding. On that note, let's take our first break because I want to come back and talk about the patient experience as well as what you're learning from as a practitioner from what you've gone through. I'm your host, Elise Cortez. We were on the air with Dr. Andrew Kadar, a physician at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, a diplomate of the American Board of Anesthesiology, and a fellow of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. We've been talking a bit about his own journey of going from a doctor to a patient and what he went through. After the break, we're going to talk a little bit about his patient experience and also the importance of resilience and recovery. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, as I am dedicated to helping create a world where people realize their potential at work, are led by those inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I continue to research and write my own books. So my last one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand the lay of today's land. What does the workforce need and want from their employers? And then I offer 22 best practices to help equip you to be able to create that in your culture. You can find more about my books at my website, elisecortez.com, and also on Amazon. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Dr. Andrew Kadar, a physician and the author of Getting Better, a doctor's story of resilience, recovery, and renewal. So I want to delve a little bit into the experience that you had of being a patient. And I really thought to myself, gosh, that must have been really hard for you because you knew so much and you were trying to honor and respect all of your caregivers. And so you're obviously very familiar with the healthcare system. I'm curious to know what might have surprised you by being a patient.
I think one lesson to me was to expect the unexpected. Now, I knew that complications occur or setbacks occur, but a couple of things. One, I expected to have the smoothest course anybody ever had after open heart surgery. Part of the reason for that was I was a gymnast in college, and my teammates would routinely get back to the gym in half the time they were predicted that it would take to heal. And so I used to think that doctors routinely exaggerated the amount of time it took to recuperate. Once I got into medicine, I realized that I was looking at an atypical sample because young athletes who are highly motivated and are in good shape are going to recover somewhat faster. There's another thing in medicine is that doctors or nurses make poor patients, that they think they know better than their physicians and they don't follow directions. And I wanted to shatter all that. I was going to recover as more rapidly than anybody possibly could. It didn't work out that way because I had a number of complications, and these are things that are beyond my control. But I ended up staying in the ICU longer after surgery, and I ended up staying in the hospital longer after surgery because I had a number of complications, some of which I knew could be expected, and some of which I was unfamiliar with. So it's the old case of the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns, and I had some of each. For example, among the unknown unknown to me was that after I woke up from surgery, I had difficulty swallowing.
Mhm.
So every meal was an ordeal. I was coughing and sputtering and just couldn't swallow, particularly solids. And once I got an ENT consult, I found out that this is not a common complication, but something that does happen, and it tends to go away in under a month. So once I knew that, I felt considerably better, because at least I knew that this was going to be a short-lived thing that I had to deal with. And then there are complications that I knew about that could happen, but of course I didn't know they would happen to me, and I was quite surprised by severity. And one of those was hiccups. Now,
Yes.
hiccups are usually a minor nuisance. But while in medical school, I learned that sometimes hiccups go on for months and even years. And some people have even died of hiccups when the diaphragm would get so exhausted that they couldn't breathe adequately. Now, at that time, when I was in medical school, the killer hiccups were as laughable to me as an attack of the killer tomatoes.
Right.
It just, who would have thought? But then once all my drains came out, now initially I had a few hiccups, but as my drains came out, I started having more and more. And when the final one came out, I had an attack of hiccups like I'd never experienced before. It was really staccato hiccups, one on top of the other, hiccups that just wouldn't quit. And there are several ways of getting rid of hiccups. There are the mechanical ways, which is swallowing like grainy sugar, or reaching up as high as you can and swallowing things to irritate the nerves that supply the diaphragm. But I couldn't swallow rapidly, so that was out. And after heart surgery, you're not supposed to have your arms rise above your shoulders. So these mechanical methods were out, so we're left with pharmacologic methods, and there are plenty of those. But the first couple that the most common ones that my doctors tried didn't do anything. So finally, we got a GI consult, a gastrointestinal consult, and I got medication that stopped the hiccups because it relaxed all smooth muscle, but also made me go to sleep for about a day.
Mm-hmm.
So would need to titrate to go back to titrate the amount of medication that suppressed the hiccups, but didn't have me go to sleep, and then lower it as over time, and that's what we did. So I had these complications, and I had some inflammation in one of my veins, and that caused a high white count, which could be a sign of infection, but it can be a sign of other things. So I needed to stay in the hospital essentially longer than most people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the ways that you coped with that, which showed your precociousness, is you went out walking quite a bit, even past places you were supposed to go. And you were scolded by a nurse for going too far out of range for monitoring. So you were doing your best to try to recover quickly by adding the exercise in. And I noted very much your precocious spirit in that.
Yeah. Before my surgery, my anesthesiologist, one of my colleagues, told me that it's important to get out of bed as soon as you can and walk around, because staying sedentary can lead to clots in your legs, and that can cause that clot to travel to the lungs, a pulmonary embolus, which can be make you quite sick, and in fact can be fatal. So with my gymnastics background, he was speaking to the choir. I was going to walk and do what I needed to do and push myself as much as I needed to. And so, yes, right from day one, I got up and started walking and really beyond my comfort limit. Now, obviously you can overdo that, but I wanted to push myself to try to get well as quickly as possible. And that's just, I think getting well after an illness is a team sport. you need your doctors, your nurses, your therapists, your family members, and of course the patient himself or herself is a crucial element. And if you don't push yourself, if you don't help yourself, then it's going to be very difficult for you to recuperate at least as well as you would if you did push yourself. So I was determined to do whatever I needed to do to get well as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that we do as management consultants is it's helpful to chart the process of how an organization serves its customers. And one of my colleagues has been on this program talking about some work that she did with a healthcare organization where they really literally mapped the care in a hospital system. And they did, in so doing, they went through the process of being a patient themselves and discovered all of this inefficiency, et cetera, which they could then remedy. So I'm curious, from now that you've had this experience of being a patient, if you could talk a bit to, what do patients need most during recovery that maybe the healthcare system doesn't really provide very well right now, or at least then?
I think the most frustrating thing for me and most patients is the priorities of the patient, the priorities of the healthcare system don't always mesh. Mm. Now, in some ways, it's a necessary component because you can't have a nurse assigned to you or a doctor be with you around the clock. It's just not an efficient way of running things. But there should be an easy way of communicating with the people who can help you. And I think being familiar with the system did allow me at times to do that, to be able to get the kind of care that I wanted by speaking the language of medicine to my nurses and to my doctors. So in that sense, that was helpful to me. Mm-hmm. But I think others can do that as well very effectively by speaking the proper language of medicine. And basically, besides all the sophisticated tests we do, what the information that you get from the patient is crucial. And there's a thing called the chief complaint. And throughout my recuperation, I realized there was always a chief complaint, something that was bothering me the most. So initially was, pain upon awakening, but by day 2, it was really the swallowing. And so I needed to be able to communicate that to my doctors, because it's one thing for them to write down, okay, patient complains of difficulty swallowing, and then walk away. I needed to be able to emphasize to them how important this was to me and how much how distressing it was. And that helped get the ball rolling in terms of getting the proper diagnosis for that. So communication in both directions, I think is very crucial. But any patient knows what's bothering them the most. And by clearly saying that, you're more likely to get help and help sooner than if you can't express that and just sit there frustrated.
That is great advice for patients. Great advice. So let's just, while we're kind of on this general subject of what you've learned that could maybe help the system, I have to imagine that beyond this book, you probably have also spoken to audiences, other medical professionals. What have you been counseling or sharing with them from your experience of being a patient that could actually help them better serve their patients?
I think it's basically what I'd learned was the things that I learned, doctors have read about, but they haven't necessarily experienced it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I try to emphasize that experiencing it is a different thing than just knowing about it. And I think that for me, there's an increasing empathy when you've been there and experienced it. And it's difficult to do that secondhand. But I think if doctors and nurses keep that in mind and have that in the forefront of their minds, they'll be able to empathize better and try to see things from the patient's point of view better. But I have to say that there's a flip side to that, in that patients also need to be aware of their caretakers' needs, because it's a two-way street. And for example, the first night that I was out of the intensive care unit, my wife stayed with me overnight. At Cedars, one family member can stay, and because of constraints of space, it's a small cot that's fairly uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And between the discomfort of the cot and the noises at the hospital and people coming in to take blood samples and vital signs, my wife got no sleep at all. So the next day we decided that she should go home and try to get some rest, because it would be better for her if she wouldn't be so exhausted. And there is a thing called caretaker exhaustion syndrome, which happens when people take care of a loved one in a prolonged period of time. And it would be better for her, but it would also be better for me, because having an exhausted and perhaps resentful caretaker is worse than having somebody who's refreshed and ready to help you. So and of course also your doctors and nurses need some consideration too. A nurse can't always materialize instantly for a non-emergency need. And I think that when you're a patient, sometimes you forget that and you're under some stress. And there's one episode that I write about that I'm not too proud of, but I woke up one morning and I had a band,
green band,
the ugly yellow band that said fall risk.
Yes.
Now I was a gymnast. I pride myself in having good balance. So it's kind of like, think of having a band on a musician saying they're tone deaf.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very upset by that. And then my nurses came and I said, look, I'm not a fall risk. I can stand on my toes. I can stand on one leg. And I demonstrated, and they were not happy with me doing that. No, you'll fall. I said, no, I won't. And I made a bigger fuss over something that was really inconsequential than in retrospect made any sense.
It was, your pride maybe at work there. So that's fantastic advice. Let's grab our last break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Dr. Andrew Kadar, a physician at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, a diplomate of the American Board of Anesthesiology, and a fellow of the American Society of Anesthesiologists. We've been talking a bit about his patient experience and what he's now learned to help medical professionals do their work better. After the break, we're going to finish the conversation talking a bit about the importance of resilience and recovery, and also the emotional and spiritual aspects of healing. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break that my latest book came out, The Great Revitalization. What I did for you is I created a simple 3-page assessment you can download from my website at gusto-now.com, and that will help you understand the extent to which your current organization is actually meeting the needs of today's discerning workforce. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Dr. Andrew Kadar, a physician and the author of Getting Better, a doctor's story of resilience, recovery, and renewal. So speaking of that title, I want to talk about resilience and really what that word means to you, why it's so central to your journey and to your book.
I think one of the things that's really important is to have goals. And while I was going through this difficult experience, I wanted to become a better person in the long run, not only to recover fully to where I had been and be able to go back to work, which I was able to eventually, but also to be a better person in the process and to be a more contributing person to others in my circle of friends and to society at large. And I think that having a purpose, a goal, is crucial to a full recovery. And I'm sort of not alone in thinking that. I think Victor Frommer, the psychiatrist who survived concentration camps, noted that people who had a purpose, people who had a goal for their lives, were the ones who were likely to survive, to continue to go on despite far more difficult situation than I was in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're talking about Dr. Viktor Frankl. I know of his work very well. In fact, that undergirds, that's one of my master's degrees in logophilosophy. And that's what I practice as an organizational logotherapist, helping people to access that kind of meaning structure because it's so vitalizing. So that's fascinating to me. Of course, I'm quite aligned with all of that. And I am really interested in, the mindset that you use to cultivate. So goals are very important, but you also really had a very strong mindset that governed you throughout this whole process of recovering and healing.
Yeah, I wanted to do at every stage everything that I could do to get well as quickly as possible. So I was willing to push myself for that because I felt I had a good life before, and I wanted to have an equally good life, maybe a better life in the future. And I think that in some ways it did work out that way. I think my wife and I actually grew closer together during this experience because we had more time to spend together, more time to interact, and I saw things in her strength and her support that I admired and appreciated, and I think she saw in me the effort that I was making to get back to the type of person that she knew before. So the experience, I think, I think adversity reveals character to some extent.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I want to talk now about the emotional and spiritual aspects of healing that you discovered and went through. And you do emphasize, of course, the emotional and spiritual sides of healing. Can you share any practices or tools that either were useful to you or that you've come to find sense that can help people navigate emotionally and spiritually as they heal?
There are lots of different things that people use. Meditation and religion, of course, is helpful for some people. In my case, I was very much just goal-oriented. What do I have to do today to get better as quickly as possible? That was my North Star throughout the whole experience. And in the interim, I've gotten more into self-hypnosis and some of the techniques like that I think the experience kind of motivated me to explore a little further. But during the time that I was recuperating, I just had one goal set in mind throughout the whole time. What do I need to do today to be stronger tomorrow and to be closer to where I want to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, reading your book, Dr. Kadar, I was very, very present that you were fairly newly married and you were really focused on getting well and again for your wife too, for the life that you were trying to make together with your wife. Is that right? Do I have
Yes.
that? Uh-huh. Yeah, so let's talk about that. So now, how long had you been married when you went through the surgery first?
3 months.
3 months. I thought it was something really early. Okay. Okay. And then now, how many years has it been since you've gone through all this? Because you now have 2 children.
For 14 years. Now, I did have I have one child with my wife, and I have an older son from a previous marriage.
Okay. Okay. Of course, I'm going to ask you this question because I can't help it. I'm an organizational psychologist. Just interested if the way you were related to Rachel was different, or the way maybe you might relate to your children now, especially since you had the son before, it sounds like, and then afterwards. Did this experience change how you related to your loved ones?
Well, I think it brought home more the finiteness of life, and that I need to spend as much time as I can to help them grow up and live a full life. Now, my son is an adult. My daughter is 12, and so I spend much more time with my daughter at this point. But my son has done very well. He's grown up and has successful business of his own. So I'm very happy for him. And he's married and has a couple of kids of his own.
That's so beautiful. Well, now you are very uniquely positioned now to give some advice, I think, to families and patients who are really struggling with the longer road to recovery, like you really had to navigate. Everything, physically, financially, emotionally, spiritually, everything. What kind of advice do you offer to those patients to try to help them navigate more adeptly than maybe they would without it?
Well, I think the lessons that I learned had to do, one of the first things was, of course, when you have a problem, a good way to think about it is, what would I advise somebody else who had this problem? Because you want to take it away from yourself. There's an old saying in medicine that a doctor who treats himself has a food for a patient and a food for a doctor. And but by taking it away from yourself, you can be more objective. So I think that's one thing. And then if you have an illness, expecting the unexpected. I think that's it. It just, life is unpredictable, and recovery can often be unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's very important to have a goal in mind. What do you want to gain from this? And I think if you have a negative experience, it's a good idea to try to come back and not just get back to your previous normal, but to get back to a better normal. And that was my goal, and I think that helped me achieve that.
So mindset is a big part of what I do to help the leaders that I work with in organizations, Dr. Kadar. And one of the things I was actually very kind of struck by in your book is you talk about how if a patient, before they go into surgery, if they say anything about not expecting to live through the surgery, or they expect they're probably going to die, that the doctor will often not do the surgery. That was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I think there's some debate about that, but yes, I think expectations are very important, and people who expect to do poorly tend to do poorly, and people who expect to do well have a better chance of doing well. No guarantees in life, but you want to do everything to help yourself, and having a positive mindset is definitely helpful for healing, and there's data on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's really what I wanted you to get to, is just the importance of, like you were bringing up Dr. Viktor Frankl before, having a will to meaning, having a will to live is so important, and having something to live for. In your case, your new wife was really an important part of your focus.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you hope that people get from your book? How do you hope that it serves?
I hope that well, first of all, after my illness, I was able to go back to work full time and have a life that has meaning for me. So one thing is it can provide hope, because no matter how ill you are, there's hope. And then I want to be able to provide some pointers on what can happen and how to deal with it. And so the things that I talk about, how to get away from denial, how to expect the unexpected, and to have a positive mindset, and to keep an eye on what's bothering you the most, and deal with that, and then take problems one at a time till all the problems are gone and you're back to your normal health.
I just, this is one of the things I love asking people in general is, what are you proud of in yourself and having gone through that whole process?
I think being able to recuperate fully and live a good life afterwards is probably the best thing. I have been able to go back to work. I've been able to travel. Last year I was hiking at 7,000 feet in Rwanda to see mountain gorillas. So been able to do things. I've also had a daughter in the interim who's 12 years old and thriving, although she gives us a lot of grief at times.
I think I saw her pop in earlier, yes.
And but I think all those things are something to keep in mind.
Well, this is very inspiring, Dr. Kadar. Thank you very much for writing the book, taking the time to write the book. And I did note, by the way, which I also think is wonderful, that part of your journey was to give yourself over to some of your more creative writing endeavors. And through this process, you allowed yourself to do that. And now we are the better for it because you have written this book. So I want to say thank you for coming onto my radar. And into my studio. It has really been remarkable to read your whole experience and to have you here on Working on Purpose to share your experience. Thank you for being here.
And thank you for letting me be here.
Very, very welcome. Listeners and viewers, if you want to learn more about Dr. Andrew Kadar, his work, or his book, Getting Better, he's got a website for that. It's gettingbetterdoc.com. Let me spell that for you. So getting, Getting, better, Better, doc, DOC, gettingbetterdoc.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. We were on air with Fabrice Desmascareaux talking about his work and his book called The Art of Retreats, A Leader's Journey Toward Clarity, Balance, and Purpose. We talked about the importance of leaders taking time to go within, reflect, be in inquiry, and decouple themselves from their work on a regular basis to be their most effective. Next week, we'll be on the air with Richard Barrett, well known for his work on elevating consciousness, honoring our soul as our being, and living and leading from values. He will be your early Christmas gift on Christmas Eve or whenever you actually observe your holiday, and the gift to cap your year. See you there, and remember, work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave, so let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.